Pues buenos días, buenas
Good
tardes
morning,
a
good
todos.
afternoon, and
Ya
good
solo
evening to you
con el
all.
momento encuentro previo al webinar
We
oficial,
were having a
se
preliminary
respira
chat
la calidez,
in
¿no?
the
De
Zoom room, and
reencontrarnos.
we can
And
already
it's a pleasure
tell
to
that
welcome you
this
on
is a
behalf
warm
of
group.
the Southwest Europe Hub to this new session of the Uniservitate webinar series on spirituality and service learning. But today, the webinar focuses on spirituality and teaching, and that is a central topic of our network. And because in Uniservitate, we don't think that service learning is only a pedagogical methodology, but it's a community engagement proposal. And it's a way of understanding education as integral formation. Así que hoy queremos reflexionar sobre cómo la espiritualidad pues puede
So
orientar nuestras
today we would
prácticas
like to
docentes.
reflect
En
on how we can
concreto,
guide our
pues
teaching
Marian
practices
nos
through
va a
spirituality.
acompañar en cómo la
Marian is
pedagogía
going to join
ignaciana
us today,
puede
and she's
iluminar
going to tell us how the
estas
Ignatian
experiencias de aprendizaje y
pedagogy
servicio
can
y cómo también
support
el
service
profesorado y
learning
nosotros pues podemos
experiences, and
acompañar
how
al
we,
alumnado
in
no
the
solo
teaching
a aprender
profession, we
contenidos
can
técnicos, sino
help
también
students
a
not only
pensar,
to
a
acquire technical
sentir,
knowledge, but
a
also
elegir o decidir y
learn
actuar
how to
pues con
feel,
profundidad,
how
con
to act, and
responsabilidad
how
social
to make
y con
decisions
sentidos y
with
abiertos a la
solidarity,
trascendencia.
social
So it's a
responsibility, with
pleasure to
meaning,
introduce you Marian
and open
Alaez
to
Martinez.
transcendence.
Marian is a full professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Deusto in Bilbao in the Basque Country, in the north of Spain. She's currently assistant to the Vice Rector for Research and International Relations in the area of international relations and has participated in international projects such as Uniservitate, Calesa, UNIC, between others. Her work on service learning includes publications on intergenerational service learning and on the assessment of service learning in higher education. Su presentación nos va a ayudar a conectar la espiritualidad ignaciana, la docencia y el aprendizaje-servicio, prestando
She's
especial
going
atención a la
to
educación
connect
integral, el
spirituality
discernimiento y
in
el
the
sentir
Ignatian way,
como
service
el ingrediente del
learning,
aprendizaje, el
discernment, and
acompañamiento y la
feeling
reflexión.
as an
Marian,
important
thank you so
ingredient in
much for
reflection
accepting this
and in
proposal.
learning
Thank you for
processes.
being with us today. And we are delighted to listen to you. The floor is yours. Marian, muchas gracias por haber aceptado. Estamos
Thank you
deseosos de
so much,
escucharte y
Marian, for being
tienes
with
la
us
palabra.
today. We are eager to
Thank you so
listen to you.
much, Laura. Muchas gracias a todos. Buenos días, buenas tardes, quizá también buenas noches.
Good morning, good
Gracias por la
afternoon, and maybe
invitación. Me
good
siento
evening to
realmente
you all.
honrada de
Thank you for
participar en este
inviting
foro que me es muy
me
familiar
to take
y
part
me
in this
llena de
workshop.
agradecimiento y
I
buenos
feel at
recuerdos de mi
home
trabajo
here.
en
I'm
Uniservitate.
filled with good
Pero
memories
también
from
tengo
my
que
work
decirles que
in
además de sentirme
Uniservitate. But I
agradecida,
should
me
also
siento
say
muy
that in
pequeñita.
addition to
Me
feeling
pidieron que
thankful,
hablara
I
de
also feel
espiritualidad
quite humble.
y
You asked
aprendizaje-servicio,
me
que lo
to talk
hiciera desde la
about
espiritualidad
spirituality and
ignaciana, que es la
service
base
learning,
de nuestra
considering the
identidad
Ignatian
institucional como
spirituality
universidad que
that is
somos,
the
la Compañía de
basis
Jesús.
of our
Yo no soy teóloga, ni
institutional
mucho menos jesuita, y por eso
home.
quiero situarles
I
también a priori que
am
voy a hablar como
not a
lo que soy, Marian
Jesuit,
Alaez,
but we are part
profesora
in
en la
our
Universidad de
institution
Deusto
of
con
the
algún
Society of
encargo de
Jesus.
gestión y que
I
desde
am a
siempre me ha
teacher
seducido
at the
la
Deusto
figura de
University, and I
Ignacio de
must
Loyola y
admit
la
that I was
espiritualidad
always
ignaciana que
attracted to
desarrolló, que desde mi
Ignatius of
incorporación a la
Loyola's
universidad hace ya un montón de
personality and
años,
his
he
philosophy.
participado en
I have
formaciones, reuniones y
participated
ejercicios
in training
espirituales que la
sessions and
universidad nos ha ido
spiritual
dictando,
exercises organized
regalándonos la
by
posibilidad de
my
que somos personas al
university,
estilo ignaciano
having the
y que
chance
ávida de
to
saber
learn
más, pues
from
me he ido
people in
autoformando
the
lo que la vida me ha
Ignatian
permitido
way.
y que
I have
consciente del tesoro que
learned
se nos
throughout
ofrece voy
life, and
tratando
I'm
también de
aware of
trasladarlo
the
a mis
treasure
colegas.
that I have
Bueno, pues eso,
encountered.
les voy
So
a
I
hablar
will try to
un
convey
amateur,
that to
eso
you.
sí, convencido.
So I'm an
Para
amateur, but
preparar
I'm
la
a
presentación he
firmly
manejado una
convinced
serie de documentos
amateur.
cuyas
I
referencias
have
podrán utilizar
used
al final
different
de las
documents as
diapositivas y con todo
sources
ello
for the
he
information
preparado
that I'm
una
going to
síntesis
share
que
with you
espero
in
que les
this
resulte
presentation.
inspiradora y
I
pueda
have
humanizarles.
prepared a
En
summary, and
primer
I hope
lugar,
you
hablaré de
find this
espiritualidad
inspiring.
ignaciana.
I
En
will
segundo
speak
lugar,
first
la
about the
pedagogía que
Ignatian
brota
spirituality, then
como
the
fruto de esa
pedagogy that
espiritualidad.
stems
En
from
tercer
the
lugar,
Ignatian
aparecerá casi de forma
spirituality.
natural el
Then,
espacio que ocupa en
almost
todo esto
naturally,
el
I will
aprendizaje y
talk
servicio.
about the
Y luego una
space
pequeña
for
referencia
service
a modo
learning in the
de
Ignatian
epílogo.
pedagogy, and then I will finish with a
Bueno, pues
few
vamos con la espiritualidad
concluding remarks.
ignaciana. En uno de
So
los cuadernillos
let's talk
ignacianos editados por
about
la antigua
the
provincia de Loyola,
Ignatian
nos dice
spirituality.
que el
In an
término
old
espiritualidad
book
viene
in
de espíritu
Loyola,
y
they
que
tell us that
originalmente
spirituality
viento
comes
o
from the
caliente
term
y que
spirit, that
precisamente
means
por ese
wind, breath,
significado
and
etimológico
precisely
es
because of
algo
that
difícil de encerrar y
etymological
encasillar
meaning, it is
y que por eso la
difficult to
espiritualidad
put
no
a
es patrimonio
definition
exclusivo ni de la
for it.
religión
So,
ni de los creyentes.
spirituality is
Esto
not
probablemente
something specific
sorprenderá a nuestra
to
compañera Arantxa Chomix
believers
en el siguiente
and
webinar.
to
Y esto es
religions.
algo que tenemos que tener muy
I'm
en
sure
cuenta
that
en
we will talk
instituciones
more
como la
about
nuestra, la
this in the
Universidad de
next seminar.
Deusto, que
So,
es diversa
institutions
en
like
este sentido
ours
y
have to
convivimos cristianos,
consider
adultos, muchas personas que luego son no
spirituality as a
creyentes, no
way of
practicantes, otros hay otros
coexisting
credos, porque la
with people from
espiritualidad
other
no
faiths,
pertenece a nadie,
other
o mejor dicho,
beliefs,
pertenece a
because
todos. Y
spirituality
a todos
belongs
nos
to no
invita
one,
a
but it
participar,
belongs to
sabiendo que
all
cada uno
of us.
lo vivirá
So
desde
we are
sus claves
invited to take
personales, que
part
pueden
in
ser vocación,
spirituality,
sentido de
considering
la
our
ética,
own
empatía,
calling,
generosidad,
our own
fe o
sense
una
of
buena mezcla
ethics,
de todo.
generosity, faith,
El
or a mixture
cuadernillo
of all this.
continúa diciendo que la
This
espiritualidad tiene que
handbook
ver con la
also
vida y
goes
con
on to
nuestras formas de
say
vivirla,
that
con cómo
spirituality
nos
has to do with
levantamos para
life
ir a
and the way we
trabajar, con la
live it,
manera
on
de
the
afrontar
way
los
we
problemas
get
o
up
con cómo nos relacionamos
to
con los
and
de
go out to
alrededor.
work,
Y
how
que, por
we
supuesto,
relate
tiene que
to
ver
one
con esa
another. And
experiencia
of
de Dios
course,
que
it
te
has
cambia
to
la
do
vida hasta el
with
punto de
God's
querer
experience that
desvivirte
changes
por los demás.
your full
Y así
life
trata este
experience to
cuadernillo de
the point
acercarse
that
al
you want
concepto
to
de
give your life
espiritualidad,
for
ese que no
others.
se deja
So,
atrapar, ni siquiera para
spirituality
definirse
has
con exactitud.
this idea
Traigo
of
también
something
ahora
that
una
cannot
referencia de
be
un colega de la
captured.
universidad, filósofo Javier Martínez Contreras, que
Martín
señala que
Javier,
no hay una definición precisa ni
Javier
cerrada de
Martínez Contreras, a
espiritualidad, que su
philosopher in my
expresión
university,
cambia con
says
la
that there
historia,
is
con el
no
paso del
such
tiempo, con las
specific
personas,
definition
con
of
los grupos,
spirituality,
y
that
añade
it's about
que es un proceso de búsqueda de
uh,
sentido,
a
que
process
orienta la mirada
searching
hacia el
for
mundo y
meaning,
también hacia el
looking
propio
at
yo.
the world
Y en
and
esa mirada,
at
mundo y persona, dimensión exterior
oneself.
e interior,
In that
se
inner
vinculan
and
de un modo
outer
recíproco
points
para
of view,
nutrirse y
there is a
transformarse
reciprocality
mutuamente.
that leads to a mutual
Bueno, pues pasemos
transformation.
ahora a hablar de la
So now
espiritualidad
let's talk
ignaciana.
about
Y la realidad es
dignation
que con frecuencia
spirituality.
vivimos
The truth is
ocupados,
that
preocupados,
quite often
muchas
we are
veces
very
sintiéndonos no
worried,
mucho más
we
que
are very
espectadores de nuestra
busy,
vida, que parece que
we
se
are
nos cae
just
encima. Y en este
observers of
reto
our
de
own
vivir la
reality.
vida y la
And we feel
necesidad de
overwhelmed. And
buscar
in this
el sentido a todo lo que
situation
nos
where we
pasa,
have to
es
live
cuando la
our life
compañía de
and
Jesús
find
nos
meaning to
ofrece lo
everything that
mejor de
happens to
sí, yo
you,
diría que es lo mejor de sí, su
Jesus
espiritualidad,
provides
de
us
la que nos dice,
his support.
no se
And
trata
the
de
Society of
ahora, además
Jesus
de todo
tells
lo
us
que
that it
haces,
is not
añadir
about
nuevas
living
actividades de tipo
today
espiritual para irte
and
a rezar,
adding new
sino
spiritual
que lo que te invita
activities,
es a vivir
start to
todas
pray.
esas cosas que te ocurren
Actually, we are invited
durante la vida
to
de una
think
forma
about all the
integrada.
things that happen
El
to
reto
us
que nos
during the
plantea es
day
la
and
integración de
reflect
todas
on
las
them.
dimensiones
So
de
we
nuestra vida
try to
en un
integrate all the
horizonte de
dimensions of our
sentido,
lives
de
into
forma
one
que
horizon of
integrar desde
meaning.
el punto de vista
To such an
ignaciano no es
extent
nunca sumar,
that
sino marcar
integration
un
here does
horizonte
not
claro
mean
de
just
nuestro
adding more
proyecto
elements,
personal de
just
vida y
establishing
que dé un
a
plus
clear
vital y
horizon for
sentido
our
a lo que
own
vamos
life
haciendo
project,
y
something
que
that
nos
will give
permita también
meaning to
elegir
what we do.
aquellas acciones que
This
mejor
will
culminen
enable
en
us
el
to choose
horizonte
those
que
actions
elegimos.
that
Por
converge
eso, la
with
clave
that
de una buena
horizon.
integración, es decir,
So
de un
the
buen
key to
sentido
proper
de vida,
integration,
es el horizonte
to give
que
meaning to our
elijamos.
life, is a
Y aquí es donde
horizon
se
that we
sitúa
will
la
choose.
sencilla
And
y
it is
compleja
here where
aportación
we
ignaciana,
have
que nos
the
dice
nation
que el
contribution
horizonte que nos propone es
that tells
ayudar,
us
o si lo
that
prefieren,
that
servir.
horizon means
Esa es la clave de
helping
integración
others
que se
or
propone de
serving
toda
others.
la
This
persona,
is
de lo que
the key
pensamos, de lo que
to
hacemos, de lo que
integration
decimos, de
of
nuestra actitud,
everything
de
that we
nuestros
do, what
modos.
we think, what
Tan
we do,
sencillo como
our
eso y tan
attitudes,
lleno de
our
sentido
ways of
como eso.
doing things.
Siguiendo el
This is so
texto
simple, but
jesuita
also so
Diogo Horizontes de
complex.
Vida, Vivir a la Ignaciana, en
Following
ese
this
integrar,
idea
ese
of
ayudar
living in the
ignaciano, se dan de
nation
mano
way,
el amor a
we
Dios
see that
y el
all
amor a
these
la persona humana,
elements
la búsqueda de Dios,
go
el
hand in
compromiso
hand. The love
por
for
el mundo,
God, the search for
experiencia
God,
interior
loving
y
other human
acción
beings,
cotidiana, mirada
engaging with the
global
world,
y
having an
compromiso con lo
inner
pequeño,
experience in our
ambición de
daily
metas y
activities, a
humildad desde
global
la que nos
uh,
situamos,
look,
el afrontar la aridez de las
committing
luchas
to doing
estructurales,
small
pero sin
things,
perder la
having
sensibilidad
goals,
por cada
humbleness,
tristeza o
but
alegría
also
personal.
facing
Es en este
struggles
horizonte
and
donde se
being
expresa y
sensitive.
verifica
It
la
is in this
profundidad espiritual
horizon
de la
where we
persona
see the
sometida a la dura
spiritual
prueba
depth
de
of
las
a
exigencias
person
ordinarias
that
de la
tries
vida.
to
Por
respond
tanto,
to
ayudar, servir,
everyday
nos remite a una
demands.
espiritualidad
So,
activa, que no
integrating leads
consiste
us to
solo en
an
rezar,
active
no
spirituality
consiste
that is not
meramente en
just
hacer,
about
no
praying, not just about doing or doing things in any way. We will delve into this now.
So now we will talk about the pedagogy from this Ignatian pedagogy. This is the tree, and the fruit is the Ignatian pedagogy, and the roots is spirituality. We have Ignatian spirituality, and we have a key, which is defining a horizon that includes help and service for others in the way God would do it. So let's have some context. In order to understand the Ignatian spirituality, we need to understand the figure of Ignatius of Loyola. He was born in the 15th century, and the 16th century is a century in turmoil. It gets rid of many years of history of the Middle Ages and welcomes the modern age. And with this comes Renaissance that looks towards the Greek and Latin culture, and the intellectual current is humanism. Humanism places the person at the center. It strengthens the rational thought. It interprets reality and moves away from the religious aspects and dogmas. From a religious standpoint, there is a clear confrontation between the Catholic Orthodox branch and the Protestant heterodox branch, which gained supporters in Europe. At the end of the 15th century, there's the discovery of America, and then this becomes the largest empire of the world that can be considered because all the regions coming into Spain were not preserved as a capital of its society. Most part was spent in an struggle to preserve the Catholic Orthodox branch. But there was lots of luxury. So we were at a crossroads of two historical stages, the medieval one and the modern ones, full of struggles and clashes. These slides, which is blurred in purpose, shows all the turmoil and situation experienced by the Jesuits when they made their first vows in Montmartre. And the Society of Jesus, when it was born, had to fight against unclear ideas, and the political consequences were very relevant. So now let's talk about Ignatius. This is important because it will help us better understand Ignatian spirituality. In his life, there is a turning point, which is the wound, and this is where his conversion took place. What do we know before his conversion? He received education at the court of the king, and there is where he learned to fight, to read and write. He learned values, religious, and the defense of faith, protection of the weak, women, orphans. Following one's word became very important, not committing injustices and not being unloyal. He traveled frequently. This is above the standard of the time and is very important because he comes from Loyola, a remote center with a linguistic culture that was very different and very closed. These trips also helped or gave him two opportunities. The first one is that he was able to know different spiritual currents that were emerging and that they were reported by the Inquisition. And at the same time, he was able to meet many different people, relevant people in society, in politics. He made lots of friends. And we can say clearly that he created many social networks at that time without any WhatsApp or any social media. These were social networks that were fed by letter writing. He wrote to his friends, to the Jesuits, and he wrote even more than Calvin. Apparently, as a conclusion, Ignatius based his personality as a result of the relations with others. And besides, considering this diversity of people, cultures, and ideologies, it would be really hard to imagine the founder of a religious order as the Society of Jesus that is strongly committed to the public life, both from the civil and ecclesiastic standpoint. What do we know about his conversion? He fought against the French in the north of Castilla. And a bullet destroyed his leg when he was defending the Pamplona castle, and he returned to Loyola after the surrender. And when he was struggling, and he was fighting for his life. Besides, he also suffered a psychological crisis. He was a warrior who could no longer fight. He was in pain, and that's how he returned to Loyola. During his recovery, he had to rest and he was bored. So he requested the books, the cavalry books. But at home, there were no books of cavalry. There was the life of Christ in Latin. He could not read it. And there was a the life of the saints. So he didn't have any choice. So he started reading. And this reading was not superficial. He was not used to this. And he really started enjoying, started using his imagination, which was very important in his spirituality, to place himself in the lives of the saints and in his previous life. And he got really emotionally involved, asking himself how he would feel if he placed himself in the shoes of the saints or in his previous life's shoes. And he started distinguishing these two different states of minds depending on the emotional impact of what he read. So he started making this discernment. So this was a step forward towards his conversion because he felt the need to ask for forgiveness. He gave a further step towards conversion when he analyzed the future, when he wanted to act, and he decided that his life project would imply going to Jerusalem and living as a saint. So we can say that this was his intention. He left Loyola with this intention. He had this soul but he wanted to emulate saints. This implied a significant change compared to the previous stage. But anyway, he is focused on his own will and his own perfection. Later on, he suffered different existential impacts. In this process, we can mention reading, that in his case, it was the door that opened up the possibilities towards his conversion and spirituality. This had implications when developing the educational institutions by the Society of Jesus. And secondly, he didn't know Latin, so he wasn't able to read that book of the life of Christ. However, he was not trapped by the more orthodox spiritualities, so he developed his own spirituality, which is based on an existential nature. We can see that a warrior got back to Loyola and he left as a pilgrim. And on his way to Jerusalem, he went to Aranzazu, where he did some vows of chastity and rejecting his previous life. And he arrived in Manresa, where he finished his conversion process. When he started looking upwards to God, Leo the 14th was asking us to look upwards. Well, he looked upwards in the way Jesus would do. He expressed solidarity to the poor. He got rid of material things and he made a vow of austerity. He was not aiming towards perfection, but he set them apart and from perfection, and he turned himself to others by helping others in the way Jesus would do it. That's where he wrote the spiritual exercises, which helped live this experience of God. So he achieved his objective and reached the Holy Land, but the Franciscans sent him back. We don't know what happened, but they told him he couldn't stay. He returned to Barcelona. He changed his individual life project into a group one. It implied different attempts, but in the end, he achieved it. He was convinced that he had to study to improve the souls. He studied Latin in Barcelona. Then he attended the Alcalá de Henares University. He started studying and preaching, but without any studies of theology. Then he went to Salamanca and he had some problems. The Inquisition denounced him. That's why he had to leave Spain, and he went to Paris, to the Sorbonne. He settled finally in the School of Santa Barbara and shared room with Pedro Fabro and Francisco Javier, and together they developed a really deep relationship. It was harder to become friends with Javier, harder than becoming friends with Pedro, right? But that deep relationship was based on having spiritual conversations and developing this friendship that went beyond studying together. This group grew, and they were 7 members, and they shared the spiritual exercises. And this group consolidated because they have a common objective, because they all want to serve God in the way Jesus did it, with absolute poverty, and dedicating themselves to the salvation of the souls. And to express it, there you can see the picture of Montmartre, where Pablo, who was the only priest at that moment, celebrated the Eucharist, where they made their vows. So we can see there pictures of Loyola with his vows of chastity, austerity, and then he went to Jerusalem. If this wasn't able, so they decided to place themselves at the orders of the Pope. So they reached Venice, and in 1538 they decided to go to Jerusalem. And they weren't able because of the political situation. So they activated Plan B and they returned to Rome to be under the orders of the Pope. The Pope commanded them different assignments, and they had to make different decisions in Rome. One of them was whether they should keep being friends or continue separately. They were aware they would be apart, that they had different personalities, and that they clashed. Then they decided whether they would create a religious order. They were afraid that the Pope would force them to implement a medieval rule where they had to pray all together. And in order to make these decisions, they started the deliberations and this common discernment process. At the beginning, to make that decision or those decisions, they started reflecting for a long period, but soon enough, and they realized that they needed to strike a balance between silence and the commitment to the people of God. So half of the day they were working, half of the day they were reflecting, and in the evening they got together to share their reflections and the emotions produced by the reflections. That they had two rules. During the day, they had to forget about that issue or they wouldn't discuss it. And secondly, once they shared it, they shouldn't do this passionately because they didn't want this passion to influence the decision of others. They wanted to have one single criterion, which was the will of God. which is
Bueno,
an Ignatian
como ven, es un método
attitude.
participativo.
As we can see, it is a
Participan todos, escuchan todos y
participative
reciben sus mociones
method.
interiores. ¿Cuáles
They
fueron las
listen to each
decisiones
other.
que toman?
So,
Bueno,
which
pues
were the
seguir
decisions that they
juntos,
made?
reconocen
They
que tienen
decided to
diversa
continue
personalidad, pero
together. They
creen,
acknowledged
están
that they
todos
have different
convencidos de forma
personalities,
unánime
but
que
they
la
believe
voluntad de
that
Dios es que lo
unanimously
hagan
the
en
will
grupo, que lo
of
hagan
God
juntos.
is to
Están
continue
convencidos
working
de su
together.
misión
They
y
are
para cuidar
convinced
su
about their
misión
mission, and to
piensan que ir juntos
preserve it,
les va a dar
they
energía
believe
para
that
llevarla a cabo.
together they
Por
would
otra parte,
have more
sienten que
energy.
necesitan un
At the same
superior, no
time,
tanto
they
por
felt that they needed
disciplina,
a
sino
superior, not
precisamente para
to
cuidar la amistad
implement
entre los
discipline,
compañeros.
but to
Finalmente, cuando
preserve
vienen
their
al Papa,
friendship.
les
And they finally
aprueba
proposed
y
this
no
to
les
the Pope,
no
who
les
approved
obliga a
it.
llevar
And they
esas
were not
reglas medievales que
forced
les
to follow
obligaban
the
a estar
medieval
en
rules,
determinada
but
zona todos juntos.
they had
Como vemos, en
to be
contraste con
together
muchos,
in a one single region
digamos,
together.
procesos de toma
So
de
there were
decisiones y
different
de responsables que
decision-making
vemos que se
processes,
toman las decisiones de forma aislada, las
and
deliberaciones proponen
these
un medio muy
deliberations
concreto para
propose a very
fomentar la
concrete
escucha, la
medium
reflexión y sobre
to
todo la búsqueda
encourage listening,
desinteresada
reflection,
de la
and
voluntad
the
de Dios.
uninterested
Ya tenemos
search
una
for the
orden,
will of God. So
1540, ya tenemos
in
la compañía de Jesús
1540,
y
the
teníamos una clave
Society
de
of
su
Jesus was
espiritualidad, la
created,
ayuda
and there
como
was a
elemento
key of their
integrator, el servir.
spirituality,
Ahora
help
añadimos
as an
que se basa
integrating
esta espiritualidad en un
element.
constante
So this
diálogo
spirituality was
y,
based in
y
constant
contraste con
dialogue
experiencias internas, individuales y
and
en grupo que
sharing
facilitan el
different individual
discernimiento, elección
internals
y ayuda al
that
que más conviene de lo que
facilitate
mejor se alinea
discernment to choose
con
what is
el horizonte
best.
de vida.
And
Vamos
this is aligned
conociendo un
with
poco
the
más esa
horizon of
espiritualidad
life. So this is
ignasiana. Aquí sí se
a,
va
a
formando
hint
un núcleo
of the
espiritual que se
Ignatian
convierte en el punto de apoyo del que
spirituality.
brotará su modelo
This is the
educativo,
basis of
ese
its
fruto de
educational
pedagogía ignaciana
knowledge.
que está en lo alto
It's the fruit
del
of the
ADN.
Ignatian pedagogy.
Tenemos algunos elementos precursores de esta
We have
pedagogía. Cuando la
some
compañía se
pioneering
funda,
elements. When the society was
1540,
created in
Ignacio Loyola, ayudado
1540,
me parece que era Polanco,
Ignatius,
su secretario,
together with his secretary
escribe un
Polanco,
documento que son las
wrote
constituciones
some
donde,
documents,
donde
which
hace la
are the
regulación
constitutions,
de toda
which
la orden.
included
Es
the
curioso
rules
porque la
for the
confianza es
order.
extraordinaria en Dios,
They
pero es muy práctico.
had
Esto también es muy
great
jesuítica.
trust
Entonces,
in God, but they
jesuítico,
were also
porque
very
se dedica a
practical
organizar y
because
dejar por escrito
they
todo, cómo podían
organized and put in
educar a los
writing
futuros
everything: how to
jesuitas,
educate
qué
future
tipo de
Jesuits, the type
qué organización tenían que tener
of
entre ellos, cómo
organization
podrían
they should
gobernarse para
have,
la mejor voluntad
how
de Dios, pero
they
en
could
ningún
govern
momento hablan de
themselves,
fundar
but they
instituciones educativas.
never mentioned
También
founding
encontramos
educational institutions.
algunos precursores de la pedagogía ignaciana en las
We have also
numerosísimas cartas que
some
escribía a sus jesuitas
elements
con consejos y
of
directrices
the
para equiparlos
pedagogy in his
y que
letters
fueran
in
capaces
order
de
to
moverse en ese mundo convulso que
help
hemos
them
comentado
move
previamente.
and
En las
develop in
constituciones
that world
aparece que
in
se ejerciten los
turmoil.
ingenios, que sepan
In
dar
the
razón, que
constitution, we
ejerciten
can
mucho el
see
estilo.
that they
Esto es
have to
muy románica, es
exercise
verdad.
style,
En las
that they have to
composiciones
use
les
a
hablaba del debate, la
creativity,
importancia del
the,
debate, de la
the,
escucha,
the,
del
the
diálogo. Y
importance
en las
of
cartas les
debate,
hablaba
dialogue,
también,
and
aparecen
listening
ahí
were focused.
referencias
And in
a
the
la
letters, there are
necesidad y a la
also some
importancia de la
references
humildad, de
to
conocer al
the need and
interlocutor,
importance of
de
humility, to
comunicar con
knowing
las obras,
the
no solo con las
receivers, of
palabras, la
communicating with
sencillez y
words, not
energía del lenguaje,
in,
el hecho
with
de que había
work,
el lenguaje
not just
y
words,
también la
and the closeness
importancia
of
del grupo de
language and the
ayuda mutua
importance
que les
of this
había
mutual
condicionado.
support group.
Bueno, llama la atención entonces que en los
What calls
documentos
the attention
fundacionales no
is
aparecía para nada el
that
deseo de
the
formar
desire
instituciones,
to
erigir
form or
instituciones
to
educativas,
create
pero pronto cambiaría
educational
la cosa.
institutions
¿Por
was not
qué?
there, but
Bueno,
soon
lo primero, no
this
querían al
changed.
principio, o parece
First,
ser que
because at the
podían no querer, porque
beginning,
no querían que les atara el tener instituciones
they
educativas, que
didn't
les
want
atara
to
un
have
lugar
these
y no desplazase
institutions
según las
to
necesidades que
tie them to a
pudiera el
specific
Papa
place,
disponer.
not allowing them to move
Pero
to
enseguida cambia de
serve other
opinión.
needs.
Por una parte, hay
However, they
que
changed
recordar que la
their
lectura fue la
opinion.
puerta a
We
la
have
conversión de
to
Ignacio de
remember
Loyola,
that
la
reading was
formación, la
what
orientación del
be
intelecto y
made
la orientación de los valores en los
Ignatius
jóvenes
convert
realmente era un elemento
himself.
multiplicador de su
Training
misión.
was a
Pero
key element of
probablemente
their
lo definitivo
mission,
fue que
and probably
que en esa época la
a key
educación
aspect was
cuadraba
that
muy bien con la
education
contrarreforma religiosa, evidentemente.
was aligned
De
with the
hecho,
religious
cuando Ignacio de
counter-reform.
Loyola muere
When
en
Ignatius
1556,
died
los jesuitas
in
habían formado 40. Habían fundado 40
1556,
instituciones
they had
educativas. Yo tengo aquí
founded
datos de
40
UNIGES. En
institutions. I have
2020
some data.
había más
In
de
2020,
2.700
there were
instituciones
over
y proyectos educativos de la
2,700
Compañía de Jesús,
institutions
con más de
from the
3,3
Society of
millones
Jesus,
de estudiantes
with more than 3 million students in over 90 countries. So the Jesuits developed an effective way of education, an educational model that was a combination influenced by the great pedagogy they had received at the Sorbonne, and then they added the style Saint Ignatius was conveying in his letters. Ignatius of Loyola, who was a great organizer, asked them to document in writing the education system that was for the first Jesuits who joined. This document, which was disseminated when he died, includes everything, absolutely everything. Everything that you can imagine is in writing in this document. The obligations, the evaluations, etc. So they developed a teaching model that was hugely recognized even when the Society of Jesus was expelled, because their service vocation inspired love and service in order to contribute with useful citizens. I will mention 3 characteristics of the Ignatian pedagogy. The first one is comprehensive education and integrated education. When we talk about comprehensive education, we talk about development of a person as a whole, not only the academic and intellectual aspect, but also including emotional, ethical, social, and psychological aspects, as well as spiritual. It's today we could call it a cross-sectional one, holistic one, that includes the academic aspects and other aspects too. These dimensions should be developed apart from the academic and intellectual development. And here we find the first relation to service learning, and because it is a holistic education, this merger with service learning activates the integration of head, hands, and heart referred to our dear Pope Francis, so as to nourish the spiritual dimension as well as the social, emotional, spiritual, and psychological ones. And on the other hand, it's a methodology that could be fully integrated as long as it is integrated in the syllabus and as it is not just a complementary aspect. But for all this to occur, Ignatius of Loyola, through his letters and constitutions, would tell us that there are several requirements for the profile of professors. The first one is that they should be educators, and this means that they should be able to convey the the connection of the topic with the values. So this is a quote that says that every discipline, beyond its necessary specialization, must engage with human society, human life, and environment in appropriate ways, cultivating moral concerns about how people ought to live together. This was also referred to by Pope Leo XIV in his visit to Spain on how we should organize ourselves to be able to live all together, which this is what it's about in our common home. The second requirement, which is very important, it's being represent or testifying with our lives. This our life represents what we believe in, on how we treat others, how we face our mistakes. All that talks about us and about the institution we belong to. This is what really gives us authority for students be led by us. In his letters, he conveys that everything is communication, that we cannot not communicate. So we need to pay attention to the details, the way we say things, in how we express our gestures to promote the mission. And the third requirement is that in the classroom, the teacher should be leader in the Ignatius way, that they should be respected and gain confidence, not for being authoritarian, but because of his charisma. And his testimony. And here I would like to mention some of the aspects mentioned in the letters. These are some identifying aspects of this leader of service. The first one is simplicity and pragmatism, having a simple language. Ignatius in the 16th century was doing some benchmarking studies. He was analyzing the competitors. He was convinced that Protestant preachers were successful because they used a concrete language tailored for his audience who did not have theological education. This was a clear sign of a need to have a new vocabulary that was not too abstract. So the main aspect is the clarity in the message. Then aesthetics is good, just as an ornamental aspect. But this is also related to the deep knowledge on the very renowned pedagogical theories. We talk about clarity in the message.
In close connection with the simplicity of language, we need to get to know the listener and to adapt. We need to adapt to that individual. The student should not adapt to us. That is, we need to offer flexibility in our activities, in our assessments, in order to help students. And finally, last but not least, the importance of humility. An educator as a teacher cannot be compatible with arrogance, with selfishness. We see this every single day in our institutions, in the hallways, and this is something that we say all the time. So humility can also express itself in active listening, trying to get to know the other person, to understand the person, to understand their aspirations and their objectives. Here we see an image of the master, the teacher, the wise man. Jesus, the night before he died, he washed his disciples' feet. At that time, washing other people's feet was something that slaves would do. And if you look at that image closely, you will see that he's paying close attention to the feet. If we add the way that he talked with different words, we see here a model of the master, of the teacher. Then we have feeling as an ingredient in learning. And perhaps you have heard this quote because we included this in a Uniservitate experience. It says, when direct experience touches the heart, the mind may feel compelled to change. Personal involvement in innocent suffering, in the injustice that others endure, is the catalyst for solidarity, which paves the way for intellectual inquiry and moral reflection. Because the Ignatian pedagogy is always looking for that relationship between experience, reflection, and action. Underlying this cycle is the affective ingredient, that feeling that comes out of experience and in combination with reflection can lead to desire or to the desire to act. So, service learning. We have the origin of the term experience. Experience means having an impact, touching somebody else's heart. We bring reality closer to our students. Later on, we will talk about support, accompaniment, but educators should help students view that reality from the point of view of service by contemplating that reality, being open to capturing reality through the senses, being affected by reality, leaving aside the intellectual part that may lead to some biases. We talk about spirit, identifying different movements of allowing oneself to be impacted, affected by reality. without the rational thinking that we will have during the reflection process. In the reflection process, the student can analyze rationally what has happened in that experience. So students can think and rationalize their experiences. So experience and reflection have to supplement each other. And this should lead to the drive to act in order to do good and also to act creatively to make changes. So resources, teaching aids should be closer to students' reality, supporting the entire process. So this is the third feature, that of supporting, accompanying students. This comes out of the spiritual exercises. Ignatius started on this spiritual journey, and he thought that he needed also a partner along the way, a partner who would do things in a certain way, someone who would act respectfully, um, also modestly. So if we consider all these personal traits and we attach them to the role of an educator, we can see this image. The painter is looking at the egg, but he's also looking at the beautiful bird that can come out of that egg. So this means helping students develop their potential, looking at reality with our eyes and guiding students throughout the process. This should be an ongoing support so that students can learn to view reality in Jesus' way, looking at vulnerable people, the consequences of decisions that are made, things that can go wrong out of those decisions, capable of putting themselves in somebody else's shoes so that later on they can guide students through reflection. In this back and forth process, through experience and reflection, students will be able to see the transcendental value of their effort, of their work, and they will feel the drive to take action. In the support process, evaluation also plays an important role. We try to assess the results of the service learning experiences, but there should be a feedback component that can re-guide our students. We also have this quote from Colvin back to the board of directors and Georgetown, saying the purpose of evaluation is not only to identify flaws and mistakes made in the decision-making process, but also to strive for excellence in order to tackle new challenges and embrace new opportunities. So, if we were to look at this TV show that has different names in different countries, we could say our graduates around the world. That could be the title of this show. We want our students to look up and to see how much exclusion there is. Not everybody is included. We know that they will be able to participate in this kind of feasts, but we also want them to feel extreme poverty and hunger. They will run across data, but we also want them to go beyond that and to be aware of that situation. They will see changes in labor, in the workforce with AI, with automation, but we want them to see that benefits do not always go back to society. Perhaps they can spend some time in these luxury hotels, but we want them to see reality as a common home that is suffering. So we can start with the easy things, the ones that we don't want. Luis Ugalde, a Jesuit who was rector in Venezuela, he said, we don't want successful professionals in failed societies. That is what he said at a graduate ceremony to his students. We want students that can go beyond the borders and the frontiers. They can unveil other truths that can be transformed by those realities. That students that identify novelty ingredients, those that go beyond what they know. And service learning is actually the number one way of achieving all this, because with Ignatian pedagogy, we know that students have to learn how to look, how to feel, how to think, how to play, how to choose, and how to act. But they cannot remain passive. They have to actively participate. Students, according to the Ignatian pedagogy, are active subjects. So going back to service learning, we know that this is a methodology that enables a direct connection with the reality that we face. We want students to add faces to the vulnerable individuals. We want them to get personally involved. We want them to work with them. So let me go back to Javier Contreras, a philosopher at our university, who would say, the look of victims is the only one that can make visible what can't be seen from any other point of view. Suffering created by human beings affects human beings. This changes because the victim's face inspires tenderness and forces to act responsibly. So by way of conclusion, some proposals to advance service learning and some final reflections. In our university, we had two systematic reviews looking at the literature on documented service learning experiences, one on reflection, another one on assessment, based on papers published in well-known journals. One of the conclusions we reached was that although there are many documented service learning experiences in these journals, neither reflection nor assessment are given the role they deserve. In terms of reflection, we need to talk about what, how, when, what kind of methods, what kind of feedback, what kind of guidance, what kind of rubric we can use. So we can quote different authors that show that in service learning, we see the important role of service learning in its ability to transform individuals, their social conscience, and their actions. And Bloomer had already said that that may be the reason why we tend to forget reflection. In terms of the evaluation component in service learning, we have different ways of performing these assessments. So we have to look at the criteria, the methods, summative, formative evaluation, ongoing evaluation, and we can conclude that despite all the efforts that we see in most of the papers analyzed, we see that they are incomplete. They talk about evaluation without talking about learning outcomes. There are some inconsistencies between the learning outcomes and the instruments used. Teachers sometimes are the only ones in charge of evaluation, and we don't see a full integration of all the aspects of these experiences. So we should ask ourselves whether reflection and evaluation are properly developed in our own processes, in our own universities. So we need to focus on a well-supported experience, but this hasn't yet been looked into in the literature. I'm not saying that there is no experience in service learning that doesn't cover all these aspects, but if that were the case, we should revisit our research work and see what we should publish, given the proper level of importance to service learning. so that teachers, faculty can have access to this knowledge, improve their own practice, and write about their own practice and put in that information at the service of others. And something that came out of this presentation has to do with the importance of setting up a mutual support group. In the Ignatian pedagogy, well, we see that group work was already something very important. He would believe in teamwork already in the 16th century. He failed twice, but he kept on going. In the celebrations in 1539, when he wanted to have a superior order, when he wanted to set up this group to have energy and resilience. And there we see some coadjuvating elements. A group with a horizon in the Ignatian style, with a common goal, shared dreams that bring them together in the spiritual exercises. The importance of shared leadership, where listening plays a very important role. The importance of cultivating friendship. In that process, there is recognition that there are different personalities, but cultivating friendship will provide them with the necessary energy to fulfill their mission. And based on my experience at Uniservitate, I think that we can speak about a group that has the same dream, institutionalizing service learning in our universities. We have exercised shared leadership through conversations and active listening, and we have cultivated friendship. This is a main driver for energy in our process. Thank you.
Lo voy a poner yo, ya que tengo el micro. Muchas
Since I have the
gracias,
floor
Marian. Ha
now, let
sido
me
un
say
gusto
thank you,
escucharte, un
Marian.
placer.
It has been so
Qué
pleasant
bien
to listen
comunicas
to
y cuántas
you.
cosas nos has comunicado,
You are such a good
te has ajustado el
communicator, and
tiempo
you
este
have
cronómetro y ya se ha pasado. Y sin embargo,
really
cuánto contenido había en tu
stuck to your
presentación. Muchísimas
time,
gracias
and you covered a lot
por
of ground
participar y por
here.
hacerlo con
Thank you
tanta pasión,
for
porque uno no puede hacer
doing
esto
this
así
so
si no se lo hace
passionately, because
desde
we
convenciencia.
can't
Así que
have all
gracias
this
por haber dado
passion
también
if you
tu
don't
testimonio
believe
a través de
in
la
what you are saying.
presentación de
So
hoy,
thank you for
de que esto de
sharing
la
your own
educación integral es
experience
posible.
through this
Y ahora voy a
presentation.
dar
It
la
is possible
palabra
to have
a
integral
mí.
education.
Así por empezar me ha
So
quedado resonando esto del acompañante,
I
del
still have some
profesorado, me
ideas in my
vuelven los
mind.
ecos
This
a quien
idea
acompaña las
of
experiencias.
providing support to
Decía, hablamos
students and accompanying
de
students
guerrero a peregrino.
from warrior to
Nuestros estudiantes
pilgrim.
son
Our
guerreros de lo
students
cotidiano
are
y guerrean muchas
warriors
cosas hoy.
in
Tenemos
everyday
que estar
life.
como
They
peregrinos, pero y
fight
nosotros como
battles every single
profesores,
day.
¿no? Que
But we,
acompañamos estas
as
experiencias.
teachers, as
Igual,
faculty,
yo
we
qué
can
sé,
also
yo
be
decía ahí,
pilgrims
una
with them.
experiencia de APS
A service
para
learning
convertir profesores que
experience
acompañan,
may
que no
convert
seamos tan guerreros y que seamos más
professors
peregrinos, ¿no?
so
Porque
that
has
they
dicho el
stop being
acompañamiento
warriors in order
de
to
una manera, el
become
cuidado de la persona de una manera
pilgrims,
seria, sobria, viendo el potencial futuro, ¿no?
looking after other
Acompañando con tranquilidad.
persons,
O sea, porque hay que entrenar una
looking
mirada,
into the
saber que esto es una carrera
future.
de fondo.
We need to
Y me
train
preguntaba yo, si
their
no somos más guerreros
views.
que
We know that
peregrinos,
this is
¿cómo
a
podemos
long distance
pues
race. So,
fortalecer
how can we as
esas capacidades
teachers
en el
become
profesorado para
pilgrims
que
and strengthen those
acompañemos al alumnado en el
competencies
APS?
in
Igual
our
los grupos
teachers'
de apoyo mutuo
training
entre profesorado que
institutes?
hace APS
How
es
can
una
we
línea de
have
futuro.
this mutual support groups
Bueno, ahí lo
among
dejo.
teachers
Y sin más,
in the field of service learning?
abro
That is another
el debate,
question
la
that I
discusión
would like to throw
a aquellas
here.
personas
So
que queréis
let's
compartir ecos, lo que os ha
see what
resonado,
others
preguntas,
think, any
inquietudes,
reactions, any
reflexiones.
questions,
Yo
comments.
voy
The floor
hablando
is
mientras la
open.
gente se va animando a hacer
While
sus
people think
preguntas o
about their
comentarios.
own
Y has
questions,
dado
let
en
me
la clave.
also
Yo,
say the
bueno, pues
following.
como llevo muchísimos años en la universidad, me ha tocado hacer
I've
muchas
been
cosas. No
working
voy a
in
decir de
this
todo, pero sí
university for
muchas
many
cosas.
years,
Y
so
de la
I
labor de la
have
que me siento más
worked
orgullosa es
on
de ser
different
tutora,
fronts,
de
and I
acompañar.
really feel
A mí
proud
me
of
gusta, y lo hago
being
de
a
forma
tutor,
diferenciada, a mis
of
compañeros,
supporting others. I do this with students from the first all the way to the fifth year. I love helping them throughout the process. They need to get to know me so that I can help them. And I think that this is part of also the Ignatian philosophy. We need to know each other well. So I play with them this mirroring exercise. They are the ones who have the answers, but they need to find them. So I ask questions, I give them short exercises so that they can find those answers. Sophia may laugh, but this is like the thief of freedom when they don't behave as they want, they lose their freedom. So we have those exercises, readings, workshops. I support them, I guide them, and I can see the huge change. At the beginning, they are quite shy. Sometimes they are reactive, but over time, they calm down and they grow so much. So service learning plays a very important role here. But from my own point of view, w- tutors should be really familiar with the group members so that they can have their trust so that you can be listened to, you can be understood, and you can be followed. I don't see any
Sí, sí,
questions. What
Almudena te da la
happens?
mano.
Almudena has her hand up.
Bueno, lo primero, enhorabuena,
First of
Marian, y
all,
muchísimas gracias por todas
congratulations and
las
thank you
reflexiones
very much
compartidas.
for all the shared
Hay muchas ideas que me
reflections.
han
There are
parecido
lots
muy
of
sugerentes,
ideas
pero he
that
cobrado más
are very
consciencia
interesting to me.
escuchándote de la importancia que
However,
tiene
what I would
también
like
el ayudar a
to
los
point
docentes
out
a
is the
tener claro el
importance of
contexto,
helping teachers
porque
to
cuando vuelves
understand
a
the
recordar
context.
de dónde venimos y
Because when
para
we
qué estamos,
remember where
yo
we
creo
come
que sí que
from
es más
and
fácil
why we are
conectar
here,
con
it
tu
is
propia vocación
easier
como docente. Y
to
quizá a
be
veces
connected to our own
por falta de
teaching
tiempo, porque andamos con
vocation. And
prisas, porque hay una
oftentimes,
actividad
because we are in a
formativa pero no,
hurry,
no
because
tengo
we
tiempo para
have
ir,
some
vamos
training and we
perdiendo a
cannot
veces ese
attend,
contexto que
we
realmente
forget
da
about this
sentido, ¿no? a
context,
toda
which
la
really
labor docente, ¿no? Y cuando nos has
gives meaning to
contado y
our
utilizando
work
ese
as
símil que decías
teachers.
ahora de guerrero a peregrino,
And you mentioned this
pues me encanta
transformation
escucharte
from
y me
warrior
gustaría
to
saber si tienes
pilgrim.
alguna,
And
alguna
well, when I
recomendación
would
para
like to know
ganar
whether you have
a
any
más personas en nuestras
recommendation
comunidades
to
docentes
attract more people
conectadas
in
con esta
our
vocación del ser
communities that
docente,
are
¿no? ¿Y qué
connected
podríamos
to this
hacer
vocation of being teachers? And
para
what could
acompañar
we
a
do
algunos que en el
to
camino se van quedando, se van
support
desilusionando?
those who
¿Cómo podríamos hacer
are
para
who feel
recuperar y para
discouraged or
todas nosotros
disappointed?
también, bueno, pues cada vez que perdamos un poco el ánimo o hay alguna
Whenever
dificultad, que volvamos a decir,
we
esto
are
merece la pena.
disappointed,
Muchas
well,
gracias.
I think
Pues
this
muchísimas gracias,
is
Manu. Y
worthwhile.
contestando
Thank you
también
very
a ti, a
much.
Laura,
And in
hablando
order
del
to
guerrero y el
understand,
peregrino,
to
yo creo que
answer
se
your
viene haciendo las
question,
dos cosas, ¿eh?
I think
Porque era un
both things
peregrino
are
con un
very
alma de guerrero.
Ignatian
Sí,
because it
eso
was a
muy,
pilgrim with
muy
the soul of
típico.
a
Y
warrior,
algo de guerrero hace falta. Yo creo que
and we
yo
need to be
también he
warriors
tenido
too.
la percepción de que muchos
I had the
compañeros
feeling that
me han ido
many
quedando por el camino
colleagues
en este entusiasmo
felt
de
disappointed
explicitar
and
la
lost
vocación, que seguro que la tienen
enthusiasm.
dentro, pero que se han dejado llevar por probablemente
However,
malas
they were
experiencias, incoherencias institucionales
carried
y
away
la verdad
by
es que yo
many
he tenido charlas
inconsistencies,
con
and I
ellos
had different
porque
discussions
yo
with
creo
them.
que todos sabemos de eso, si
I
nosotros
think
somos
we all
expertos
are
en
aware of
incoherencias
this.
y somos personas
We
incoherentes
are
todos los días, dices,
expert
pero
in
¿dónde me meto yo? Pero que esto no es
inconsistencies
lo que yo quiero, pero ¿qué estoy
because
haciendo? ¿No?
this is not what
Y a veces metemos la
we
pata de
sometimes
que
say,
era más
okay, this
gorda o
is
menos
not
gorda,
what
pues la
we
institución
do,
también mete
and
pata, esto
we
parece que tiene
mess
personalidad
up,
jurídica.
and institutions
Y
sometimes mess
entonces
up, which is
a mí me
even more
gusta conversar con
serious.
ellos y les digo,
So I
fíjate en el
like to talk
proyecto,
with them and
fíjate en
said,
las
just
personas, porque esto
focus
va
on the
mucho más allá
project,
de las
forget
personas.
about the people,
Va de un
because this
proyecto y
goes
van de
beyond
un
the
sueño, si
people.
es
It's a
creyente, un
project
sueño de
and it's
Dios,
a dream.
de
It's a
su
dream of
reino en este
God
mundo. ¿Y
whose
nosotros qué
kingdom
podemos
is in
hacer? Pues
this
lo que tenemos,
world.
pues
And
los
what can we
profesores.
do?
Tenemos
We
una
are
herramienta
professors, we are
brutal.
teachers, we
Vamos
have a
a dar un
great
buen ejemplo en
tool.
la medida que
Let's
podamos. Vamos
set
a
a great
ayudar. Vamos
example. Let's
a
help.
llevarles por donde nos
Let's
gustaría que fueran como
take
estudiantes
them in
y
the way we would,
imaginando ese
along
ese
the
ave
way we would
magnífica y
like
esos
them to
profesionales
take. let's help them become these professionals they can become. I talked to them about this right from the beginning. And I also remember my colleagues who feel astray that they have to think about all the good that they can do, because I have seen changes in them.
al lado oscuro y entonces les llevo tiritas a ver si se
And
ponen bien, escuece bien la herida, un poco de agua oxigenada y a
sometimes
ver si
I
pasa
give them
con
some,
el
let's say,
paso del
some
tiempo un poco pasa de
band-aids
largo.
to
Yo
help
creo que hay que
them heal
respetar al
their
sujeto,
wounds.
pero bueno,
I
yo le
think we
digo
have
para
to
pensar
respect
también un
subjects, but
poquito,
I
pues
also
por si puede,
believe that
porque
we
como
have
bautizos,
to
animar con sus
think about
compañeros,
this,
porque la
because
educación es un
this is what
elemento
Saint
importantísimo
Ignatius did, because
multiplicador de
education
esfuerzos
is
en el
an
cumplimiento de la misión
very
que tenemos todos en la vida y es
important and
pues dejar este
multiplying
poquito mejor cuando que
element,
nos lo encontremos y cada uno
which
con el contexto que
includes
tengamos y
living
donde
this
podamos
world
estar.
better than the way we received it.
Gracias, Marian.
Thank you,
Veo que
Marian.
Daniela ha
Daniela
levantado la mano.
has raised
Daniela.
her hand. Daniela, you have the
Hola,
floor.
Daniela, qué gusto.
Hola, ¿cómo va? La verdad agradecerte,
I would
agradecerte
like
porque para quienes
to
venimos de
thank you,
universidades
because for
jesuitas,
those of us who come from Jesuit
escucharte con
universities,
esa claridad, volver a reforzar algunas
listening to
apuestas
you
es
with
como que uno
us, that
reafirma, ¿no? Y
clarity helps
recuerda
us
eh,
reaffirm
vuelve, ¿no?
everything.
A plantearse estos desafíos. Escuchándote se me planteaban dos
And
cuestiones, ¿no?
when I
Una
was listening to
vinculada
you, I was
a
asking myself two
que este
questions. One
tipo de
is
procesos,
related
particularmente
to
el
the fact that these
acompañamiento,
processes, especially
¿no? La reflexión,
support,
exige otros tiempos
requires
académicos, ¿no?
different times. Academic
Digo, y en eso el
requires
desafío
time,
tal
and
vez
there's a
pensar que
challenge,
esos tiempos trascienden
because
un
this
curso,
time go beyond
¿no?
or
Porque a veces
transcend just
consideramos,
the
o sea,
classroom.
te escuchaba y,
I
y
was
pensaba
listening to
en
you
mis cursos
and I was
y
thinking about
pensaba cómo iba a
my
pasar todo
classes
esto
and
en un
how
semestre, ¿sí?
to do all this
Y
in
entonces
one
digo, cómo
semester.
pensar también institucionalmente itinerarios de
And
acompañamiento
I was
donde
also
no
thinking
sea
about
responsabilidad de
support
cada docente
processes
o de
in
cada
which it is
curso
not just the responsibility of the
hacer
teacher
acompañamientos aislados, ¿no?
to
Sino
do
acompañamientos al
isolated or to
proceso
provide
de las
isolated
personas.
support,
Y creo
but to
que en
provide
nuestras universidades
support
eso
to persons as a whole.
todavía está,
And I think in our
digamos, se desea,
universities,
pero todavía está
this is
gestándose,
a dream,
¿no?
but is something that
Pienso que
has
lo
not been
ato también
consolidated
a tu
yet.
comentario sobre hacer grupos, ¿no? Que esto no es una
This is
tarea
connected
personal
to forming
solamente
groups, which is not a
de
personal
docentes
task.
aislados, sino de instituciones que nos echamos al hombro el compromiso de acompañar y de
Institutions
acompañarnos, ¿no?
that
Porque en la medida que
have
acompañamos a
committed
otros,
to providing support, because
sabemos
as
desde la
long as we
espiritualidad
provide
ignaciana que
support,
también
we
acompañamos
know
nuestro propio proceso
that
espiritual.
we
Pero creo
provide
que
support to our, or we
también exige
accompany
revisar
our own
tiempos,
spiritual
¿no? Porque
process.
a veces
But this
tenemos nuestras
also
agendas
entails
académicas
reviewing
tan
our
saturadas
agendas, because our
que
agendas are
pedirnos a los
really very
docentes y
busy, that
pedirles a los alumnos que reflexionen, que
asking
hagan
teachers and
síntesis, que
students
disciernan,
to reflect, to make
¿no? Cuando
discernment,
salimos de un curso entramos a otro, planilla,
because we have to
informe.
fill
Bueno,
forms, we have to file
ahí hay como
reports.
una contradicción
So there's
propia de
some
lo que
kind of
queremos y los
contradiction of
procesos.
what,
Y por otro
between what we
lado,
want and the
eh,
processes.
hago eco
And on the other
de
hand,
esta, también de este desafío de generar
there's this
espacios de
challenge of
discernimiento, de
generating
reflexión
spaces
al
for
propio
discernment
equipo
and
docente y de
reflection
gestión,
for
¿no?
the
Porque sin
faculty
eso es
and for the
difícil
management team.
también
This is
hacerlo.
hard
Y
to
creo
do all,
que es importante
and
ofrecerlo, pero no de
we need to
manera
offer
aislada,
it, but
sino
not
bueno, de manera
in an
orgánica
isolated
y de
manner,
las
but
experiencias de contacto
uh,
con la realidad.
in
En América Latina
organically.
tenemos
In Latin
también
America,
algunas experiencias
we
más
have
sentidas, eso
some
experiencia de
experiences
aprendizaje de servicio, no podría decir para
of
docentes y
service
gestores,
learning
¿sí?
for
Pero
teachers
hacer
and
eso orgánicamente,
managers,
compartir
that doing
experiencias con nuestras
that and
universidades en estos
sharing
dos sentidos, ¿no?
experiences
En el
with other
acompañamiento, más allá del
universities.
curso,
This is what I
y
mean
del
by
acompañamiento
support,
a los
support to
docentes
the
y gestores
course and
para que
support to
sepamos acompañar y
teachers,
propiciar.
so that
Creo
we
que son
can
dos desafíos
provide
que ha
support.
planteado
These are two
así
great challenges
muy claramente y que, bueno,
clearly
ponen
mentioned.
esa vara alta para seguir pensando, ¿no?
So
Así que gracias
we have to
por
keep on
abrir
thinking,
las
and
oportunidades de
we
seguir
have to be up
pensando
to the
juntos y de abrir
standards.
estos desafíos
Thank
enormes
you for opening up
que creo
the
que nos
possibility
interpelan
of
como
thinking
docentes, pero también
together,
interpelan a
and
nuestras
for posing
instituciones en
these
sus procesos.
challenges
Así que muchas
to our
gracias.
institutions and processes. So thank
Muchas
you very
gracias,
much.
Daniela. Me ha
Thank
hecho
you,
mucha ilusión que
Daniela.
dijeras al principio que te había Bueno,
I
eso,
really
pues reafirmar que
like that
recordar cosas, porque yo sentí lo mismo cuando
I
cuando
made
cuando te
you
escuché a ti en Roma
remember
hace unos
many
años.
things,
Y me
because this is
pareció
what
precioso cómo
happened to
hacías la
me when I
metáfora
heard you in
histórica.
Rome many
Y
years
bueno, pues
ago,
todo eso
and
también lo
when we
sentí
talked about the
contigo.
metaphor of the pie. So this
Em,
is what I also felt with you.
el acompañamiento es un proceso,
Support
no
is a
puede
process.
ser una cosa puntual,
It
no
cannot
puede ser
be
flor de un
an
día. Es un
isolated
proceso, de ahí que yo
element. It's a
canso,
process.
poca gente me hace caso, pero me canso de
Mm,
reclamar ese
I
proceso que
n-
empieces con los estudiantes
really
desde
believe
primero
that this
y
process
acabes
has to
cuando
begin with the
acaban la carrera.
students right from the beginning,
Obviamente todos
and
tenemos
it should
responsabilidad
continue until the
sobre ese
end. Of course, we are all
acompañamiento en nuestra
responsible
medida,
for
pero obviamente
providing
hace falta
support
tiempos
as long
aparte.
as we can,
Y en
but
esos tiempos
of
aparte,
course
bueno,
we
pues
need
yo
time.
lo que
And
pienso es que no sé, cada universidad tiene su
of course,
estilo, ¿no?
every
Nosotros tenemos un
university has
servicio de
its
educación
own
universitaria
style. We
con muchos
have
requisitos lingüísticos.
university
Creo
guidance
que si
that
los
have
empleamos de forma
very tight
eficiente, quizás
times,
llegamos
but
a
if
esa
we use them
eficacia, ¿no?, del
effectively, we
acompañamiento.
can
Pero tiene
provide
que ser, te
effective
tienen que
support.
conocer. Nadie se
However,
deja acompañar por un desconocido. Y
nobody
eso es
uh,
así. Una persona que cae, pues a lo mejor
can
tiene
be
carisma suficiente
supported
como
by
para arrastrar,
persons who
pero
are
es muy
unfamiliar to
distinto con
them. But
adolescentes casi,
it's
porque
very
superan la
different with
adolescencia, pero lo son
adolescents, or they are
cuando
practically
acaban
adolescents,
también,
even they are not
pues es muy
so.
difícil
It is
que
very
se
hard to
dejen
offer
llevar
support.
si no
They
es
are
de
not
esa manera. Luego el
willing to be
proceso es
guided.
fundamental y
So
efectivamente hay una
therefore, the
responsabilidad
process is
institucional
essential,
de
and there's an
fomentar ese
institutional
proceso.
responsibility to
Hablabas también
promote
del
this
discernimiento
process. You
común
were also
y cómo
talking about common
institucionalmente debiera
discernment and
de
how, from an
establecerse.
institutional standpoint, this should be
Sí,
established. Yes, it is true.
yo la verdad es que cuando leo la historia de
When
Ignacio de
I
Loyola
read
y
the
de las
story of
disertaciones de
Ignatius of
1539,
Loyola and
como
the
decías tú, lo del plan de
dissertations
acompañamiento espiritual,
in
¿no? Cuando
1539,
nos formamos en esto, pues
when
efectivamente, yo ahí
we were
entendí
trained
mucho
as
mejor que
that, I
después de muchos libros que había
understood
intentado leer sobre el discernimiento en común y
this
que no había entendido mucho, la verdad.
even
Pero en
better
lugar
than
de
with
se
other
oposición a
books
los
that were
primeros
not very
jesuitas que tienen
clear.
que
But
decidir
when I saw
algo
the
que
first
lo que les va
Jesuits
la
that had
vida
to decide
y cómo lo
something that
hacen,
implied
entonces entendí
or that
muchas
would
cosas
affect
de
their
forma
whole
tan
life,
sencilla como este relato,
this
¿no?
helped
Así es
me
como
understand
el leer
things
judío.
easily.
El
This is how I
discernimiento
understood
común,
it. Common
creo que hace
discernment
falta una,
is
que a lo mejor lo tenéis vosotros en vuestra universidad, pero aludiendo
or
a la
needs,
diversidad que hacía mención anteriormente,
and
hace
specifically talking
falta
about
una
diversity,
confluencia de espíritus, es
needs
decir,
a convergence of
un objetivo
spirits. This
compartido
means a
y hace
shared
falta
objective,
tomárselo muy en serio
and
para
it
que eso
needs to be taken
realmente
very
salga
seriously
adelante.
so
Entiendo que
that it
determinados
can be
espacios es más
implemented. I
fácil
know that in
que en
some
otros.
areas or
Yo
some
estoy
spaces this
pensando
is
que a lo
easier
mejor
than
del
in
rectorado es
others.
mucho más fácil.
Perhaps in the rectorship this is
Una reunión de
easier.
departamento,
In a
y hablo de nuestra experiencia de universidad, es mucho más complicado.
and it's a lot
Porque
harder in a
el que las
department
personas que están en
meeting,
el rectorado,
because
digamos que ya se
people
trabajan
in the
de muchas
rectorship
maneras esa
work
confluencia de espíritus y sin embargo
on converging spirits.
pues bueno, pues el
However,
resto menos, podemos decir.
this is
En
not the
todo esto,
case
yo
in
agradezco a
other
la Universidad de Deusto y me
departments.
imagino
So I
que
would like to thank, of
en
course,
tu caso,
the
viniendo
Deusto
de la Universidad
University,
Jesuita
and
también, yo
I'm
agradezco
sure you're
muchísimo porque
grateful
si
to your
algo es
university too,
capaz de cambiar y de
because if
transformar
something
es
is
la
capable of
formación y los
transforming,
ejercicios
this
espirituales.
is training and
Y
spiritual
en mi vida
exercises.
personalmente
And
tengo
in
que
my
decir que a mí
personal
me
life, I can
convirtieron los
say
trabajos
that
espirituales, que
I
hay un
was
antes y un
converted
después,
by
que
spiritual
tiene una gran diferencia
exercises.
entre los
There's
trabajos
before
espirituales.
and after. There's
Y
a
me parece
turning
que tiene
point
una
after
capacidad
these exercises.
increíble
And I think
esa
they have a
experiencia de Dios
this
de
experience
transformación.
has a great capacity
Em,
to
pero sí,
transform.
hace falta formación y
But of
eso
course, we
hace
need
falta,
training,
no es
and
el coste de la formación per se, sino todas las
not
personas que acuden a esa
we
formación por todos
need
los gastos derivados. Dependiendo
all
del
the
estado de las
people, and
universidades,
of
pues podrán
course, we
permitírselo
need
más o menos, pero
it's
realmente el
funding,
proceso
but
de
the
formación,
process, the
yo creo
training
que los que
process
están
is
en el
essential.
perfil
And
de Deusto
all those who
lo
are
habrán
here
podido
from
confirmar
those two
cómo
have
mueve montañas
confirmed
ese proceso de
that
formación. Gente que
this
va a lo mejor un
training
poco,
process is
pues, a
very
ver qué me
powerful.
cuentan o un poco
Some
escéptica
people are very
y,
skeptic,
bueno,
but
algo cala
in the end,
y algo cambia.
something
Sí,
changes in them.
has hecho un alegato a la excesiva carga de ocupaciones y de
You
continuo
mentioned
cambio
that we have
que afecta
lots
tanto
of
el cambio de
occupations
locución nos
and we
estresa
have
no
a
solo
great
nuestra
workload
ocupación
and that
continua, sino
we
que
are
ahora nos ponemos una
stressed.
gorra de tutores, ahora nos
So
ponemos
we
una
are
gorra de
tutors,
investigadores, ahora
then we
cambiamos la
are
gorra y nos ponemos otra
researchers,
y eso es un factor
and
de estrés
this is
muy
a
importante
this
del
causes
que
stress. This is
tenemos
very
que ser conscientes,
stressful
que
and
parece
have
que
to
el mundo
be very
universitario en ese
aware.
sentido parece que no va
Apparently,
a cambiar.
this won't change in the world of universities. So we have to probably integrate it to the Ignatian theories, and we have to offer our best service considering these schemes that are somewhat hard. Thank you for your feedback, Daniela. I haven't answered, but I have just confirmed your questions that are very interesting. Thank you.
Y hay una pregunta en el chat o un comentario.
There is a question in the chat from Mila. Are these service learning spaces adequate for discernment processes? And service learning should be cross-sectional. It should not be restricted to one single subject. Maybe it should be handled together with the pastoral department. Well, I think this is in line with what you have been mentioning about the processes and support. Would you like to add something else, Marian? Thank you, Mila. What you have expressed is the chance to make service learning an interdisciplinary methodology, including economists, business people, psychologists, pastoral department, so that everybody can contribute. This would be like #1 projects. It is very hard to make them multidisciplinary, but making them interdisciplinary would be a great aspiration. It's a great aspiration, which would be really enriching and more profound.
Vale. Pues hemos llegado a la hora de finalización. Si queréis también por cumplir todas esas agendas, me rebotaba
we are running out of time, but I would like to mention what Pope Leon XIV said about silence. We need to be quiet to become pilgrims, even if we are a little bit warriors, female warriors. And today I would like to leave today's session with and express my gratitude to you, Marian, for sharing this with such a great passion. Even if we are in different parts of the world, we can share horizons. And just to remind you, this webinar cycle will end on December the 23rd. There has been a change in the date. Arantxa Chaniz will talk about spirituality and religiousness. You, of course, will be reminded from gift bulbs. So thank you very much to all of you. See you at the end of the summer or at the end of the winter if you're in a different hemisphere. It's been a pleasure and thank you for participating. Thank you all. It was a great pleasure to share this time with all of you.
Gracias.
Adiós, adiós.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Adiós.